week's episode is part of our series, Careers in Liberal Arts. People often undervalue liberal arts degrees, but there is a lot of gain from a Bachelor of Arts that can help you in a number of careers. Economics, for instance, is a valuable area of study for individuals interested in international business or trade. Understanding what you can do with an economics degree can help you to truly value the content of the courses you're enrolled in and find ways to gain practical experience to develop a meaningful career after graduation. This week's guest is Jay Qin. He's principal at Sard Verbinnen in Hong Kong. Prior to joining SVC, Jay was a transactional lawyer with two leading UK international law firms. Jay has advised a variety of clients, including in technology, venture capital, private equity, retail, and manufacturing sectors. Jay has advised clients in mergers and acquisitions, cross-border investments, fundraising rounds, diverse commercial arrangement, and regulatory matters, often acting as an external general counsel for his client. Currently, he's doing something a little bit new, strategic communications for crisis management, the same firm, and he'll tell us a little bit more about that during our interview. Jay graduated with an honors degree from the University of Toronto. He had a bachelor's degree in economics, and he's actually a classmate of mine from the master's degree in Asia Pacific Studies. He also obtained a Juris Doctor degree and postgraduate certificate in laws from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome to our podcast, Breathe In, Right Out, Jay.
Hey, Lisa, good to be here.
Yeah, it's so nice to see you after like 15 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. So great to be on, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So a lot has changed in your life since we were together in MAPS, the Master's degree of Asia Pacific Studies at University of Toronto. And you've had many degrees. You're a really educated guy. Tell us a little bit how your education and maybe more specifically your liberal arts degree has helped you get to where you are today.
I think a liberal arts education is actually very beneficial. I think one of the great things about a liberal arts education is the breadth of issues that you are exposed to and the kind of the critical thinking skills that you develop. Mm-hmm. And then along with that is the writing skills that you developed. And say those three things definitely carries across careers and in industries. It certainly helped it laid the foundation for law school and then eventually a career in law, and then transitioning that to a career in financial communications and crisis management. It's all okay. the same thing to be able to what I mean by the breadth of things is to see an issue from many different perspectives, which is important every day in what we do now.
Right.
And then also to question things, right? Mm-hmm. Are you presented information and you just accept that as fact? Or are you presented information and you kind of, ask? When I was in law, it was more about asking like, okay, where the fallacies are, where things doesn't make sense, how do we pick this argument apart, or how do we make it tighter and make it, more robust? And now it's more about, asking questions of, well, would this make sense to this audience? If you were an investor, what kind of questions would you have? If you are an employee, what kind of questions would you have? If you are a mom and pop person, what questions would you have? And then along with that is your writing skills, which is it's something that's critical. Yeah, very much undervalued. And if you are a good writer, and like there's many definitions of good writer. I don't want to say like there's one pigeonhole of a good writer, but having an ability to write clearly, concisely, simply,
Mm.
is a tremendous skill that I think a lot of people don't really see unless they are faced, or sorry, they don't really value unless they have to do it or have to review other people's writing or
Right.
read something and you're like, what? This makes no sense. What you know, like, what are you trying to say?
Right.
And I think, and it's a skill that you'll develop and continue to improve upon, refine, evolve throughout your life, right? Like
Mhm.
writing lawyer is very, very different from writing for communications, right? Like
Right.
essentially writing for one
And
audience. You assume a base knowledge of things, whereas writing now, the things that I write now is consumed by a variety of audiences who may
yeah.
not have base knowledge of things. And
Can
how
you
do you just
tell us a little bit about this transition from law and like what is this current position?
SVC is a strategic communications firm, financial communications and crisis management. So
Mhm.
what it's a bit hard to explain. A lot of people don't really understand what we do. Basically, we manage our clients' voice in the public arena,
Okay.
right? So if you're a high profile individual, or if you are a Fortune 500 company, what do you say to the market? What do you say to the general public about a variety of issues around the world? And some of your issues may be contained. Some issues may have certain resonance in one jurisdiction in one country, which may have the opposite effect in another country, right?
Can you give an example?
What's an example? So if you, so we do like project-based stuff. So it's or retainer clients. So project-based, it would be like IPOs, major transactions in the world. So if you are a Chinese company going to the US,
Mm-hmm.
you have a variety of audiences, right?
Right.
A Chinese company that's trying to IPO in the US, you'll have a lot of audiences. You'll have the regulators in the US, you have the regulators in China, you'll have your investors globally, you'll have your consumers, you have your employees. And so when you try to communicate your story, if
Mm.
you are trying to communicate, the story, the narrative in your company, what do you say and how do you say that? How
Mm.
do you attract investors? How do you say that to um, be on the right side of regulators? How do you
Right.
say that to assure your employees will be taken
And
care of?
like would be an example of a crisis.
Well, there's been a lot of crises over the years.
I guess maybe like the pandemic. So maybe you're a Chinese company going to the US, the pandemic hits, and then
Yeah, I mean, so I think for crises, it falls in a lot of different categories. Without getting into, say, client names, just in general, say if you are, if you're an airline manufacturer and you're an airline and your plane goes down,
mhm,
right? Um, what do you say? All these people are calling you. Regulators are calling you.
mhm,
The you know your employees are calling. Customers are calling. Uh, the media is calling.
mhm.
What do you say? How do you communicate that? What should how should you as a company approach this situation?
Mhm.
And these are kind of like the things
And so
we
how does your that's so interesting, I don't think we think about that. We just think I don't and like that's amazing because how fast some of these companies do put the messaging out. to the media, to their, like, the speed at which you need to communicate, and also the complexity of the issue. And I think we don't realize there's people in the background helping to craft that message. And this is really interesting to me, and I can very much see how your diverse education kind of comes in here, because you have this economics degree, plus you were in maps with me, where we had a course together as our graduate degree, and we had people from all disciplines in the course. So economics, sociology, political science, history, East Asian studies, but we were all studying Asia. So in that very course, you get a number of perspectives and have to understand one kind of question from a variety of disciplines. Plus you have this law degree, which probably gives you another perspective. You've been writing throughout these various educational degrees. So, it really helps. Along comes a problem. You can see, you've already been trained to see a problem through a variety of lenses. And you already have practiced communicating to different types of audiences. As you said, like, lawyers talking to a judge is different than a lay person understanding a case or something, or even talking to your clients, and then having to communicate about a crisis, as you said, to a variety of audiences. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That for my firm now, people come from a variety of backgrounds, whether that's politics, investment banking, lawyers, campaign managers, and it's needed to have that variety of background, because you need to have a variety of perspectives on the issue, because
right.
the things we generally deal with are the most high profile, super sensitive issues for a company,
right.
prominent individuals, that it's difficult to, you need a variety of viewpoints on what you're writing, because everyone has a kind of a different take on
right.
What does this like actually mean to you, and it's about, oftentimes the challenge is distilling very complex issues into easily digestible messaging. Yeah, sound bites, or 2 or 3 lines, 2 or 3 sentences, or if you have a bit longer, maybe you're crafting a speech for someone. But that it's all writing, but it's how do you get across sometimes very technical things, or sometimes that you feel like I need to spend an hour explaining the foundations of what the issue is before we then begin discussing what the issue is.
Yeah.
So it's about kind of taking all that in and then distilling into things that's understandable by the average person, and distilling it down to its core 3 or 4 points that you're trying to get across, that is central to your argument or your thesis.
That's so interesting. And you know what? That's really, I hope that students listen to this, because I think people get the perception, you watch the news, you listen to the news, there's this beautifully crafted sound bite or, announcement. Yeah. And I think there's a perception there's someone really clever that just comes up with it, like, fast. And there could, I think with a lot of practice, probably someone doing your kind of job probably does maybe get a little faster. But look, he's shaking his head. But I like how you've explained, or maybe you can even explain the process a little bit of how actually there's a lot of background and understanding to these few sentences, maybe, that somebody comes out and tells the media or whoever about an incident. And then also, I like how you explained that, also they need to communicate to different audiences. So someone on the team about the incident is going to be the media person. The management have a different version of the same message to communicate to staff. Customers calling in, they're getting a different message that's gone through a communication chain. So it's really interesting how you're explaining, this is a process that takes hours to get to these messages.
Yeah, it's not like it's not about good writing. No one can write it perfectly on the first try.
Right.
Like it doesn't happen. No matter how experienced you are, it just doesn't. You don't get it. Good writing takes lots of rounds. For some of the stuff that we do for clients, I can have a first draft. Other people will comment on it. We'll go through like lots and lots of rounds of revision about thinking about this. What does it mean to this person? What does it mean to this demographic? And it's interesting because now we're in such a global world, and you're absolutely right that communication is almost instantaneous. You need to, come up with something very quickly, which is sometimes very stressful. But also you need to be very thoughtful about what you're saying, because the world is global. What you're saying to an audience in the US will not be taken the same way if you are in China, if you are in Indonesia, right? And you need to factor all these things in, right? So just because it plays well to one audience doesn't mean it's playing well is the wrong word. I shouldn't say that. Just because you get your message across to one audience, that doesn't mean that same message will resonate. It may sometimes have the opposite effect. Right. And this cuts. So because of this, it brings in lots of issues of politics, of geopolitical politics, of understanding what current affairs are, understanding what the dynamics between nations, between states, between peoples are, what's topical in each kind of, broadly topical in each region, what are the sensitive pain points for each culture.
Can you give an example of, like, if you said one thing in one place and then you said the same thing, how it would be interpreted very well and very badly, maybe?
What's a good example? I mean, a hypothetical example. If you are in the US, and this may be an obvious example, but I think that this brings out the kind of the point. If you are in the US, and let's take emojis.
Okay.
If you are Apple and you have emojis, and we all know some emojis are flags, right? If you include the Taiwan flag in your emojis, and you're doing this and completely taking out the politics of who's right, who's wrong.
Right.
But if you're taking that and you have, looks good, yeah, it makes sense for whatever reason. And then you have your Apple users in China see that emoji, or the regulators or whoever see that emoji, they're going to take severe issues with that, right? For good or bad, like for right or wrong, doesn't matter. But that is a tremendous issue for you as a company. That's one example. Or for example, let's say, freedom of speech is different across nations. I think that's often, if you are in the States or if you're in like Canada, the US, you think there's somehow more, there's somehow a definition of free speech.
Right.
But free speech is different across, has different meanings across liberal democracies, across more authoritarian countries.
Right.
You are, if you're saying something against the monarch in one country, that's maybe not won't play as well in Thailand, right?
Right.
Or different nations have different conceptions of progressiveness, of cultural norms.
Right.
A good example would be like.
Well, I'm thinking. Okay, give me your example. I have an idea.
I think for example, so a few years ago, if you are, there was the Denmark. Sorry, these are not actually drafting examples, but I guess it kind of goes to my point that there was a cartoonist that
Oh yeah.
Muhammad,
Right.
And from a Western liberal democratic perspective, that's absolutely
Not a big deal.
Not a big deal. But you can't say that in Indonesia, in the Middle East, oh, these are like not democracies or whatever. Their people are they don't understand. But that does genuinely resonate as offensive to the populace of that nation. It's not about the government. It's not. It's legitimately offensive.
Right.
And I think from the Western perspective, it often there's a certain arrogance that almost looking down that you guys don't know as much as we should be.
Right.
Oh, you're not democratic, therefore your opinions are less valuable to us because you're not where. So I think it's about navigating and understanding those cultural differences and issues and now.
That's a good example. I was thinking, even if we think of like the Meghan Markle Harry interview and how it was analyzed in the States compared to the UK, we can see that difference, right? Those are actually two examples of Western democracies, but we have like a republic and a monarchy. And in one, it was in the UK, there was a lot more backlash against Meghan Markle. She didn't criticize the Queen, but there was kind of, more negative press. And in the US, it was interpreted very differently of like, oh yeah, you're challenging the authority, like the firm, of course you're going to say this. So that's a very interesting example of how a message is interpreted differently into two countries that have a long history of, not always getting along. Obviously, the US left the British Empire, but having a generally kind of friendly relationship, speaking the same language, some shared cultural norms or values. But even in that situation, you end up with two different interpretations of probably the same thing Meghan Markle said or did, or Harry said or did in the interview.
Yeah, exactly. And I think along those lines, if you read what the Buckingham Palace has put out in their statement after the interview, it's extremely well written. Like when I read that, I can't remember word for word what it said. You know, it expressed disappointment. It conveyed the message that, you know, we don't agree with what they're saying, but it also did it in a way in which it take the high road and that there's nothing else that can be challenged, right? So it's very,
Right.
it's extremely well written, like that you can distill all these things into 3 or 4 sentences.
Right.
Express the emotion, express the sincerity, but also, you know, not be like, no, she's lying. Like, this is not true at
Yeah.
all. You know?
Right. Yeah, because they had some pretty heavy stuff in there. And then
Yeah,
what's interesting is like you have this. How long was the Oprah interview? A couple hours or something. And then Buckingham Palace just like, you know, a half paragraph response, which people kind of criticize, like, okay, what? But as you said, like within that short paragraph, there was a lot of information. Like the message was clear. And also you see a different style, right? The Americans, let's just get it all out. And then the British monarchy of like, we're gonna respond, but we're, you know, we value our privacy, and this is a
yeah,
family matter. I think a part of it, they said something about it being a family matter.
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
if you look, the Queen came out of it very. I mean, who's gonna really attack an old lady at this point? But but she did. She fared very well. I mean, there's concerns about what's gonna happen when she's gone and Charles takes over. But and even Meghan Merkel made a point, if you watch the interview, how they directly don't say anything against the Queen because they know that's going to be, you know, interpreted that's it's kind of in a way safer to go to the lower level royals than the Queen. So it just kind of looking at those two, if you kind of took that situation, I think you could get a lot of the kind of things you're doing for your job, I'm guessing, and how important those little subtleties are, and how you have to be very thoughtful about what you're saying to who, in what context. And if you look at that situation, I mean, I don't think that interview really had the effect that it could have. You know, earlier there in the 90s, Princess Diana did an interview about the palace and stuff, and that caused a crisis that went on and on and on and really like severely damaged the monarchy, right? I would argue this thing with Merkel and Harry didn't have the same impact. Maybe the palace has more crafty communications people, I don't know, but they seem to handle it better.
I think it's probably,
we're getting off on a tangent,
but I mean, we don't do stuff in the palace. That's
but that's an example of some high profile people, right?
We do stuff we do more like financial and like market bearing stuff. So, you know, like if
well,
you
the
are,
Queen is the richest woman in the world, so
is she?
maybe you should acquire her as a client.
I don't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, apparently.
We can match the palace's machine there, but I think what we do is more like, you know, if you say something, does it affect your stock? Are you able to communicate, you know, the value of the deal that you do? But you're right.
I think
it's the same principles.
It's all coming down to that, how you started off this interview with, like, the value of a liberal arts degree, breadth, so these multiple perspectives, critical thinking about how this might come across one way or another way in different situations, doing all those revisions, having multiple perspectives, and then finally the written part. And I think I just want to go back to is that people often don't. We live in a world of technology and videos, people don't realize these really well done videos or these sound bites or speeches have been written down and people are practicing them. They don't just come out and have this perfectly crafted speech off the top of their head. But I think there is a little bit of a misperception sometimes that it's more important to be a good speaker. But in fact, to be a good speaker, you have to be a good writer, or you have to have someone else doing the writing for you. And so don't undervalue that skill.
Yeah, I mean, good speaker and necessarily good writer is probably, those are sometimes overlapping, but not often different subsets. And like, it's, you know, the quotes that you hear, it's not that someone's magically like, if you look at Tim Cook in an interview, or if you look at, you know, any politician interview, it's not that they're going into it blind and like, or just winging it. You know, some have a natural gift more than others. But these very well prepared people, they are, you know, I guarantee they have teams of people that are drafting, that are writing, that are continuously, you know, refining what they're going to say and preparing them for it. It doesn't come like overnight, and it doesn't come like they're just sitting there like, oh, this magical thought just popped into my head. Actually, here we go. You know, I think it's somewhat more natural. I think, like, for example, Obama's probably has a bit more natural.
Well, I mean, but these are people that wrote books. I was just thinking, like, I'm a big fan of Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry, he's a very witty thought. Like, you see him on an interview, right? He's very thoughtful.
Yeah.
He's witty. He's funny. But he's also written several books. So, I mean, I would argue, or this is my thought, is that, in my experience, if you're a good writer, actually, I noticed this about myself, and I'm probably doing it this very moment, is you actually will actively be editing your thoughts as you speak. So you're very, like, in my experience, those witty quips, they probably already played through the person's, even if they're spontaneous, played through their mind, and they may have seen them like almost like a typewriter, added a little something, and then spit it out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my experience as an introvert and someone who writes. So that skill of writing can even translate into being better at spontaneous witty quips, especially if you're revising.
Because when you speak, it's very different from when you write, right? Because when you write, it's just you and the paper, and you need to have an organized thought, or else no one understands. I mean, I think the best I can give for your students is, like, read some of Trump's like
tweets.
Like, they make no sense.
Oh,
right? Like,
transcripts.
Yeah, they make no sense. And that's the difference between speaking and writing, that, like, when you actually sit down and write it.
So you'd argue his tweets make more sense than his transcripts?
Well, yeah, they make a lot more sense than his transcripts. I mean, we're scraping the barrel here, but, like, it's not a high bar to achieve to, but I would say, at least the tweets, like, you kind of get it. But if you read some of the, like, the speech transcripts or interview transcripts, you know, after like the first 2 lines, like, what are you talking about? Like, this makes no sense. I can't even follow what you're saying.
Then what would you say to, like, well, he managed to, you know, have a large following and still does. So somehow this disorganized communication worked, or maybe could have been like a strategy.
I think that's probably like a larger issue that we address in this podcast. Of, you know, I think right now we live in a polarized world of not liberal versus conservative, or Democrat versus Republican, or anything like that. We're divided into tribes of, you know, extremism, and
Mm.
whether you're politics on the left or politics on the right, both sides have like it's the same issue of like there's no room for debate, there's no room for difference of opinion.
Yeah.
You're wrong, and here's the people that agree with me, and I don't want to talk to anyone who doesn't.
I wonder how communication can
dialogue.
help with that.
I
I wonder if if you're a really good communicator, you can get both sides to agree.
I don't think it's necessarily getting both sides agree. I think it's like, unfortunately, we live in a world in which people are not receptive of, or at least currently, I think part of that is like social media and the technology and the echo chambers that's crossed it. There's not an openness to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I found it ironic in Hong Kong that we've gone through, and this might be a very controversial thing to say, but like I find it ironic that during the protests, the same people who are fighting for freedom of speech would shout down anyone who disagreed with them.
Oh yeah, that's so
incredibly ironic. So
yeah.
you're a democracy fighter and you are fighting for freedom of speech only if that speech agrees with you. So
see, to me, this seems about communication because people forget one big part of communication is listening. And so, this makes your job very challenging, but also I think to probably be good at your job, you have to be somewhat good at listening, or as you sort of described it, understanding what would sit well with different audiences, which is in a way listening. You're trying to get so if I was a protester in Hong Kong, right, and somebody comes and argues with me about my freedom of speech, or I'm protesting for freedom of speech. Well, if people are really riled up, it's hard to have any conversation with them. But in my experience, if you actually listen to that person and said, oh yeah, okay, I understand you're worried about X, Y, and Z, or whatever, right? And then you said, but here's why I'm doing this. We could have a conversation, and I guarantee somewhere in the middle of that conversation is a truth that both sides could understand. But if you're just I'm over here and you're over there and you're shouting at each other across the street, there's no forward motion.
I think it's, I think that's what the liberal arts education kind of gives you, as we were talking about at the start, is that it gives you a viewpoint to other perspectives, and that your opinion may not, you're open to other people challenging.
Well, there's no right answer, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
It's not like engineering. I mean, even math, upper level math also, there's, as I understand it, some fluidity with what's the right answer. But it's not one of those things where like, okay, this is the answer, right or wrong. It's more about, have you thought of all the different potential other solutions or answers or possibilities? And can you argue that what you have come up with is potentially the best or one of the better answers?
Yeah, it's not binary, or it's not, it doesn't mean it's just black and white. It's about, it's about having that debate and about having that conversation and kind of understanding, what's your concern? Like,
right.
At work we go through things, and like, someone might have a very different perspective than I do, and sometimes I may agree with it, I may not agree with it.
Yeah.
But about like talking that through,
right,
and understanding where each of us are coming from, and then arriving at something. Sometimes it would be that it was like, yeah, okay, this is something I've never considered, and you're right that like sense. And it will, even though I think it's right, from your perspective, I can see how it would be wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's about having the dialogue. I think, and on the whole, our kind of world now is, less. It's
More
more
people need to do liberal arts degrees.
Yeah, basically. I think more people
Maybe we need
liberal
to.
arts education. Hey, man,
Yeah.
like in grad school, we, those are some lively debates, and it's not like we hate each other at the end of the day. We
Yeah.
may be passionate about what, but
I think the thing you're talking about different concerns, but also there's the idea in a liberal arts degree that someone pointing out a problem with your argument is good, because that's helping you to better develop your argument. It's not like, oh, bad, I hate you. It's like, okay, you know what? Good point. I didn't, as you said, didn't consider that. And I'm going to then rethink how I think about this problem. And that's part of the process. So I think really everybody needs to take a liberal arts class or two.
no, I agree.
And learn that, this is a good thing. A good part of life is that people challenging your thoughts. It's hard, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. It threatens your ego, but ultimately it helps you grow. The world is a complex place. In a lifetime, you're going to understand like one little smidgen of what it means to be a human being in this particular period of time. I mean, there's so much to know and so much to think about.
No, I agree, and I think like one of the things is that I tell, like, I mean, I mentor a few students from UT as well, and one of the things I always tell them is that in school it's easy, right? Because the whole point of school is to lead you to a certain set of answers, right? That's the design of education, is for you to go research or go do whatever you need to do, and then you arrive at some criteria of the answer, right? If you're writing an essay, are you hitting these points? Are you distilling these things? Then you'll get a good grade.
Right.
And I think as you move on to life, that there's no guidepost, right? There's no like, hey, no, you should be going to this, success in life. You should be reading these books, and then you'll do it,
Right.
And I think that's
no formula.
Yeah, there's no formula. There's not the same set of mile markers that you're supposed to hit.
Right.
I think in that sense, the liberal arts education helps you, one, understand the world that you're living in.
Mm-hmm.
Two, think about the world that you're living in. And then three, analyze it and come to a conclusion, or maybe not conclusion, is probably too strong, but a direction about how you should go about things, how you should think about things, and then apply that with some real life experience, some work experience, then your chances are pretty good, right? And hard work.
So
place.
We had a really interesting conversation here and didn't ask many of my questions. I just kind of like, okay. But I do have two things I want to get your input on. One is, what if you could distill your thoughts down to a couple sentences, what advice would you give someone early on in their bachelor's degree? And then the second thing I want to talk about is a book. I mean, we said there is no book, but I think reading and learning a lot is helpful. So I'd like to know, like, I see you have a lot of books behind you. What's something
I don't think there's a lot of books. It's all fake.
Pretended books. It looks like books in the blurred version of Zoom.
I think in terms of advice, I would say I I would say the same thing. Like, I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, oh, what was your plan at like going into undergrad?
Mm. Didn't have a plan. Well, I wanted to be prime minister. That was my plan. And so far, it hasn't happened.
Still young to go aside. I think, yeah, there's no magical plan. There's no. I think going into university, or if you're in your undergrad, I think the idea is probably should be just be open to new experiences, try different things, travel the world, experience different places, experience different cultures, and that will inevitably benefit you as you progress in life, as you progress in your career. You'll be able to relate to people more. You'll be able to work in a team better. You'll be able to, strike up conversation and find common ground with people, right?
Right.
And I think that's one of the key things. You don't need to like get straight A's.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is I'm not discounting the need for formal education. And I think that's the necessary condition. But to really, to have a more fulfilled, more robust kind of application, I interview a lot of people when I was here, when I'm in my current firm.
You mean for jobs or?
Yeah, like. I would say the people that are really impressive are not ones that you have. I often find, having good grades, all that is necessary. I'm not saying like if you are a D- student and then on we look at your resume.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're impressive. Let's get this guy.
Well, I think it's more important if you want to go into the next stage of education, right? You got to have a certain grade point average. You have to have shown you understand the fundamentals.
Yeah.
I don't know about jobs. Like here in North America, putting your GPA on your resume, there's a debate. Like, should you do it? Should you not do it? You don't need to do it.
I think it is that, especially when I was in law, like when we're hiring fresh law graduates,
right,
or junior lawyers, interviewing them, we'll always ask for a transcript.
Oh, right? I see. Yeah.
And that transcript it's important because it's one part of a reflection of who you are, right? So you have 1,000 applicants. Okay, no one's going to go through 1,000 applicants. How do we narrow this down? Here's the criteria. But when you actually come to the interview, I would say the people that end up getting hired are not ones that are the top. I mean, of course, you have outliers that are like extremely personable.
Yeah.
Everything about them is great. We all hate them, but they're still with you. Those people aside, the people that at least in my experience, that tend to get hired are, if you have the best grades, you are top of your class, but when we have a conversation, it doesn't really work, or there's nothing there, or I find that like all right, okay, you're applying to be a corporate lawyer.
It's kind of like a robot answer.
Yeah, I don't need to quote you on legal stuff, and technical stuff, because to be frank, like you would know nothing, and you're like a baby with training wheels, and like I don't need know what you're doing. So it doesn't matter. So let's talk about other stuff. What do you think of X issue? What do you think of X politics? What do you think of what's the major business news? What's the market like? Are you able
Right.
to have a conversation? Where have you been? What cultures have you seen? How do you interact with these people? If you have a conversation like that, because hey, listen, I'm probably going to be seeing you 12, 14 hours a day sometimes. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you have the best grades and you are just kind of annoying and
Yeah, it's
well,
about human interaction, right?
like, yeah, I don't want to spend the day with you, man.
Right.
You don't need, but you have, good enough grades to pass the bar, but we get along and you'll fit in and you'll make the workday go by faster, or you'll make things go and I know I can rely on you. Yeah, you'll definitely get hired. So
Yeah.
I guess, that's a long way of
Well,
saying,
just kind of like be a well-rounded person.
yeah, I think that's a long way to, when it's saying is there's no master plan. It's not like you need to have all the answers right away, and just go explore, go figure out what you like, go to your students, go try many different things. I think the model is always, or the approach should be always give your best effort, but
Yeah. It's okay
try
to
different things.
fail.
It's
Failure's
okay.
the mother of success, as the
Yeah,
Chinese say.
give your best effort, try different things.
Just
Don't
be
always
human.
just because someone else is doing it this way doesn't mean it's the only way to do it or it's the best way to do it. And you don't need to feel pressure to be oh, I have to go to law school, or I have to do X, I have to do that.
Right.
Take time to
Right.
try, to
Yeah.
get out of your home, go travel, go see the world, go do all these things that I think U of T, or at that age, that affords you,
Mm-hmm.
and try different things. Try, I think in undergrad I did painting houses. Do whatever,
Yeah.
these all these skills will inevitably come back to help you with things. Make you more well-rounded, more personable. You'll be able to relate to people more. You'll be able to talk to people on different topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a long way of
So
saying don't just be singularly
book
focused.
smart.
Yeah, book
Yeah.
smart. Be well read.
Yeah.
And be able to talk about things. But
So
I think one of the things going through Monk Center, going to grad school, and all the liberal arts association, hey, we can talk about Foucault, we can talk about philosophy, we can talk about world politics, but at the same time we can also talk about sports. We can talk about
yeah, we had a nice little hangout in our basement office, and
yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
if you went down there too much, but we used to go for dinner, and our program supervisor would bring us sandwiches when there was meetings upstairs, and it was just a nice little community. And we were just we're gonna kind of wrap it up here, but before we even started the podcast, Jay and I were just talking about, okay, I see this person or what's happening with that person, and so 15 years later, still wondering or having some more regular connections with people in our program. Like you said, you saw one of our classmates regularly that lives in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And just kind of wondering what's up with people. So that kind of that ability to be part of a community, have human interactions, communicate, respect people from different backgrounds. Like in our program, there were people from all over the world, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Who were interested in Asia and had very different ideas. We'd talk about articles and have very different interpretations because of where they're coming from in the world and stuff, and sort of taking that away. So yeah, no plan, You don't need to have a plan, just go out and figure it out. And if you were to say, because you mentioned it is good to be well read, do you have a favorite book, or what are you reading now?
Do I have a favorite book?
Like,
I think
I don't really read books, he says.
there's a lack of time to really get into novels.
Squid Game. He's just watching Squid Game. No. I haven't seen Squid Game yet.
I think one of my favorite books is A Moment in Peking. If you manage to, that's one of the few Chinese books that's written in English natively, not a translation. I think that really gets to have a good understanding of a lot of it. It will make you have a good understanding and appreciation of a lot of the sentiments of Chinese nationalism. It feels particular issues the way it is today. And that's one of my favorite books. I think recently I probably.
So what was it? A Moment in Peking? Do you know the author? Or we'll look it up and we'll put it in the links.
The author, I'll have to send you. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I'll figure it out. We'll put the link in the post below.
It's a very old book. It's very, very old.
Okay.
And then, aside from that, because most of the time it's reading articles rather than novels. It's my days.
That's most of our days.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, thanks for connecting. I know you're over there in Hong Kong and it's like 10 p.m. at night. So thanks for being on our podcast, Jay.
Well, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me. Very, very good.
It was good to connect.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to find out more about Jay, you can look him up on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the description below, and stay tuned for a short meditation and writing exercise.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lisa.